countdown.
Okay, super. Italian time.
Dr. Massimo Testa, thank you so much for coming on with Cole and I. By the way, this is Cole Kessler. Cole, this is
Nice to meet you, Max.
Max.
My pleasure. How are you?
Good, man. Good.
Max, I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're super busy, and everybody wants a piece of you for decades now. I would like you to tell our viewers, who are you? Like, which teams were you a part of? How did you get into cycling? I know you went to school in was it Bergamo?
No, it was Pavia, still northern Italy.
Okay. Well, anyway, I'll let you give us a little
I'll try
synopsis
to keep it
of
short
your
because
history.
I'm an old guy, so I got a lot of years behind me.
No, don't keep it short.
So, yeah, no, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. Always nice to reconnect with you. So you belong to a very nice and fun part of my career, so I appreciate that. And good morning to everybody that is watching. So yeah, I started cycling in 1985. And probably a lot of people here were not even born at the time. And my first team, I would say professional team, was the American team 7-Eleven. That was the first team to race in Europe in a big tour. They came to race Tour of Italy in 1985. And so a number of circumstances, I find myself being their doctor for that one race. And then we create a good relationship, and they kept me on board for the rest of their sponsorship. They went on till 91. So I did 6 years with 7-Eleven. And then the same group became Motorola for another 5 or 6 years. And then the sponsorship ended. So I jumped on a Italian team. At that time was first was MG Technogym. There was the second version of Vario Stea. There was a strong team in Italy in those years. And then we became Mapei. This more or less the same group of us. And then I stayed with Mapei until I joined BMC from the very early phase in the early 2000. We started as a American Swiss team, mainly with the main mission to develop young athletes. And then we became Continental Pro and then Pro Tour. And I stayed with them pretty much till COVID. Then we had a couple years, we became CCC. There was the same group, the sponsor and the owner of BMC, Mr. Andy Rees, unfortunately passed away. And so the team was taken over by a sponsor from Poland that was called CCC. And then that was my last involvement. I think it was 21, 22 season. And then since then, I've been enjoying Park City, Utah.
So, I grew up, I had the winning magazine when Andy Hampsten won the Giro in 1988. In 1988, I know you were there. Obviously, one of the most iconic races in history with the Gavia and the snow. It was seared into my mind, and I've heard you tell the stories before. For that, I'm just going to go through your career and pick out moments that I know are quite iconic. But please jump in if I'm missing anything. But I think you told me that you guys went to the local ski shop that morning and bought up all the hats and gloves.
Yeah, so that was a tough stage. We knew that the weather would have been a factor. Indeed, some team tried to cancel the stage. The morning there was an early meeting with the promoters, and they were trying to cancel the race. Would have been favoring the time trialists and would have been playing against the climbers. And we, at that time, were 7-Eleven. We had one of the best climbers at the time, was Andy Hampstead. And he was sitting pretty well in the overall. And the other team that want to keep the stage was, at that time, I think it was Banesto. There was, maybe it was still Reynolds. But anyway, it was the Spanish team. There were a few other teams that were trying to have the stage going. So they made the shorter version, but the version included still the Gavia Pass with the downhill into Santa Caterina Valfurva. That is one of the coldest places, that time of the season. I knew because I spent 17 years of my life racing for the local ski club. So I knew that place, and I knew every turn of that down. And then there was a very cold downhill following the river to Bormio. So we realized that the problem would have been the downhill. People would have been getting cold. So with Mike Neal and Jim Ockwis, they were the managers, this was in May. So we went by a sports shop that was selling everything at the end of the ski season. And we bought goggles, ski gloves, stuff, and we loaded in a car. And we went up with the car, with the soigneur, we went up to the top of the pass and with all this stuff to give to Andy. In fact, Andy came up, he was second. There was a guy in front of him, and the other guy went down straight down the downhill. Andy was like 20, 30 seconds behind. There was snow, it was covered with snow. And so we gave him some equipment, particularly, as you know, gloves, in those conditions are important. Keep your hands warm so you can operate on the brakes. That was way before these brakes. And so Andy did that. Long story short, down halfway into the downhill, the other guy that was ahead is leaning against the tree, freezing, and Andy went down. It was the first one at the bottom of the downhill. Then Breaking, there was a time trialist from the Netherlands, catch him and on the downhill to Bormio, but still Andy got the jersey, so that was a key factor in that tour of Italy. Indeed, Andy won the overall and kept the jersey for the rest of the race, and is still today the only American ever to win the Tour of Italy.
So, obviously that's a big moment in the history of cycling. And as we move on to Motorola and then MG Technogym, but then Mapei, which would you consider Mapei kind of the first super team in the history
Yeah,
of
I would
cycling?
say that Mapei already had some of the features that then developed to become, I would say, mandatory in organization to run a successful program. So was first we had an extended number of pros, and we create an A and a B team. The B team that was highly criticized by the expert at the time was a team of 14 neo pros that were taken directly from the junior category, so skipping the under 23. So we developed a pipeline in which we are testing the best juniors from all the countries where Mapei had some connection, and we had scouts, particularly, Belgium, Spain, clearly Italy, Switzerland, and some of the Eastern countries like Hungary. And so we start to have these young athletes that were either world champion, national champions, junior, and we didn't want them to be worn out, try to to become a pro running very tough under 23 experience, which, as you know very well, is very, very consuming in Europe. It's very competitive. Some of these talent got lost in those 4 years or get injured. And so we decided to have a team which we put the best junior or very young athletes anyway, and have them racing a year as a B team in second, say, level competition. We couldn't have them racing with the other team, and we create a pipeline of junior and young athletes, including, Cancellara, Bettini, Paolini, Bodrogi, that was world champion, Michael Roger, couple time
Mhm.
world champion time trial. So they turned out to be successful. The first group, I think the first year there were only 12. And I think each one of those 12 won at least a world championship or a pro tour race in their career a few years later. And so we had a performance center in Milan. That's what they hired me to run. And the guy that was directing the program was Aldo Sassi, very smart and very ahead of his time trainer. And he was a physiologist. and I was the doctor, so I was bridging between the science and the team life. What to bring to the field from what the research uh, was showing, and we were testing every athlete continuously. So the idea was to use data when the data were not as many as the data we have to our disposal these days, and mainly at the time were data coming from the lab with some data coming from the field. That could be really laughable right now, thinking that we're still using heart rate. We start to use heart rate variability, and during that phase, we start to use the first power meters. We had Michele Bartoli was one of the very first top rider. He won the World Cup twice in a row that was using a power meter. So we're ahead of those times. And the data were fewer, but I have to say that most of those data were measured, and so they were real data. A lot of the data we use now are estimated, which in the law of big numbers could be precise enough, but sometimes you got so many data that you got a lot of noise too. So in one way, our life was simpler.
Yeah.
And that was in
So
the 90s.
Can I
Yeah,
ask a
so
question, Max?
sure.
yeah.
Um, so back then, what did like a training plan look like for a rider? Because you don't have all these power numbers and everything that you can give to a rider now. Was it just based off heart rate, or how did that look like?
So at the very beginning, before the power meter, was mainly heart rate and rate of perceived exertion. So how hard you go, which I always like because it's also a way to connect with your own body. So if and Levi knows because sometimes I was having him doing intervals, covering the power meter. So he didn't know. And so I do 3 times 10 minutes of what you feel is your threshold power. And then we were checking later and it was within 5 watts.
Mhm.
So it's important that you know how your body feels that power because the power is power, but the interaction of the power with your biology changes depending on the level of the effort, the temperature, if this is the second week into a tour or is just a single day, if you have been tapering for that race or you are using that race as a training race. So you go in kind of loaded with training load. And so I think that just looking at numbers, thinking that the number means the same thing every time makes the value of the number less than what it is. You have to be the one that owns the number and you know how to use them, not that the number owns you. And I see this all the time. I have people that come and they say, hey, I'm doing this interval, this power, but some days I can't do it. I feel, yeah, because, your biology. So that day you work 20 power less. The biological stress is the same. There would be 20 watts more when you're fresh. And not just to kill yourself, try to match the same number all the time. So in one way it was easier, heart rate, rate of perceived exertion. So the
Yeah.
training looked like now, you had some main workout in a week, depending on the level of the rider, the time of the season, the goal, and we were periodizing the loads, blocks of 2-3 weeks as a mesocycle, and then within a couple of weeks we had a microcycle of a few days that were connected and they had the purpose to be, one before the other or after another. And the intensity were expressed in heart rate or rate of perceived exertion.
Cool.
That's awesome. Good question. We talk about that a lot on here, Max. I'm always trying to steer the conversation into paying attention to your own sensations and knowing your body above all of the numbers and the wearables that exist today. Those are great reference points, but they are not there to really just dictate everything that you do. But I have a question. So you were talking about Mapei and this development squad, which sounds like it was the first of its time. How did specifically, Cole's sitting here. He was part of the Lidl Trek development team. Now he's on Modern Adventure. He's still pretty early in his career developing. how do you see these days that there's these phenomenal teenagers that are coming straight from the junior into the world tour and they're winning. Like I'm talking about Remco and um, Del Toro and Ayuso and now Paul Seixas. How do you? I mean, these are anomalies, and I have to imagine for someone like Cole, it can feel like you're a little left behind. You're a little bit like, oh my god, like what am I doing wrong? But in fact, yeah, we didn't see that until now. I can't remember any time when a 19-year-old we were talking about a 19-year-old vying for, the victory in the Tour de France. So, what do you have to say about that and how it is today versus back then in Mapei?
Yeah, no, let's say that you said correct. I think Mapei probably was running one of the first program like that. And one of the idea behind, which is probably what is happening now, because now we have data coming from indoor cycling that, can be used also to select talent. At the time, we didn't have that option. So we had either to test these people in the lab. Otherwise, you basically were selecting young talent two ways. One based on the results, and the result doesn't come necessarily from the physiological, say from the engine, can come also because some kids at that age are ahead of their peers because they have better skill, they're more tactic, they have other qualities. But the one that have a good engine, if you lose them when they're young, they don't have a chance to develop the tactic, the skills and everything and so on. So the idea, let's say, let's try to get numbers from the young athlete. And when we find the one that have the potential, then we train them, skill, strategy, having a good management, good sport director that has experience, that tell them how to read the race. And, they said for many years, cycling is a cardiovascular chess. So you can have the good cardiovascular, but you also have to be a good chess player. I learned that early in my career when I started coaching my first athlete. There were the 7-Eleven riders like Andy Hamstin and Eric Hayden and Jeff Pierce, all this first generation. They had huge engines, but they were not coming to race the Tour. They were a little behind on the volume of races and race experience that they had to build against the equal age Belgian and Italian that's been racing since age 10, 2 times a week. And by age 13, 14, they do short stage races and then they do longer stage races. So when they come to be pro, beside the cardiovascular fitness, they know how to race in the rain, how to stay out of the gutter, how to stay off the wind, how to stay on the wheel of the person, how to find the good wheel, because they did this hundreds of times. So we had these very talented young Americans that were used as a junior to compete in a small peloton, 15, 20. I raced very little as a junior cyclist in Italy. I did 2 or 3 races. I was a soccer player. But I remember the one time I show up at the race in my town, there were 300 juniors signed up. So
Whoa.
they had to send us out in waves of 100. And here I was talking with these guys from Colorado and California. They say, yeah, no, junior race. Normally I wait till I see everybody's tired and then I go by myself. Yeah, you got the biggest engine and, you just win solo because there is no strat. You don't have to fight 150. You have to fight 10 or 15. So the idea of Mapei is how many of these big engine and cycling, U.S. cycling had a lot of these talents, starting from Greg LeMond, Andy Hampton, Dr. Hyde, and now Ron Kifo. I don't want to forget any of those because they're all good friends. And then the generation of Lance and Kevin Livingstone, George Incapi. So we go on and on and on and on. Some of these guys, they all had in common that they use talent. Some of them had to find their way to get to the stage and to get picked up through parallel path. Like, say, Lance, for a long time was a triathlete. And Chris Carmichael identified him as a potential great cyclist because he was showing his talent in triathlon. So Mapei said, okay, let's test the best junior of France of Italy. So we were inviting them to the Mapei Sports Center, which is still doing similar thing even in other sport, in soccer now. And we created what was called a talent identification application. So we're putting, actually it was an Excel spreadsheets at the beginning, and we're putting 10 predictor of performance. So every sport have predictor of performance. And in cycling, historically it was the VO2 max, the percentage of utilization of your VO2 max. So you can have two athletes with the same VO2 max, but one can sustain 85% for a long time, the other one only 75. So clearly, the VO2 max itself doesn't give you all the story. And then the economy, so how many watts you produce for each liter of oxygen your body is processing. There are people that for a liter of oxygen generate 60, 63 watts, and other that produce 80. So if they have the same VO2 max, the same percentage of utilization, but one produce 80 versus 63, clearly the first guy is a better cycle. So we're trying to identify this along with biometrics like fat body composition, lean mass, what's a threshold for lean body mass, what's a P for lean body. So then we are looking at the glycolytic or lactic mechanism. What was the lactic power and the lactic tolerance? So we had 10 or more data that automatically in this spreadsheet, we see highlight the top 10 every year from 800 junior from Europe. And so we saw, okay, this guy is always in the top 3 or 4 position through the whole season. So let's bring him over, see what if he's interested to turn pro, if you want to come racing with us. Bring normally at that time their juniors they come with their mom or dad or with their family, and we tell them, hey, they can live in Italy. We had apartments like a pro soccer team or in United States NBA or football team would do probably, or college do here, because in Europe we don't have the college sport. When you're 17, 18, either you go pro or you go home. If you go to school, you cannot really do sport at the pro level. And so that was an idea that, I think was very reasonable and showed results, in my opinion.
Of all these, I mean, you've worked with the list of champions you worked with is super long, and you talk about working with 800 juniors at the time. Who are, let's say, the top 3 most physically gifted riders you've ever worked with?
That is impossible, because everybody has some unique quality. I could say that you were definitely let's say in the top
No,
10.
no. I don't fall into that. No. I mean,
No,
maybe I
me.
worked hard, but
No, you are too humble. You definitely had a lot, very good physiological numbers, and they were making you the kind of rider that was excelling in the race where you did excel, like steady, particularly climbing, long effort, a high percentage of your two max. You are not so much, like a
explosive.
Greg Van Avermaet in
Mhm.
explosiveness or doing a lot of surges during a classic race, for example. So every one of these, some more quality being mentally prepared to go through hell if they want to win the stage, even when the legs were not there anymore. And some people are just natural talent to make things look easy. I cannot call 3. I would say that the ones I enjoyed the most to work with, I mean, I did for 37 years, so I cannot even recall. Or I
Yeah.
recall, it's easier for me just to recall the last 10 years. But let's say the last athletes I worked with what really impressed me in 2 different ways. One is Greg Van Avermaet, because I coached him for 12 years. And this guy got everything, he got the physiology, he has the mental toughness. At the same time, he's a very humble person, and is good in a team because everybody respect him, even if he's very quiet in the way he expresses himself. And I don't know, many of you know Mickey Scher. Mickey Scher has been Swiss champion. but he's one of the nicest guy, very disciplined. And actually, in a team, you need rider like him that really make the glue through the team. You know, I really enjoy working with TJ Van Garderen. I think also one of the most talented athlete during our years in BMC, and he got the potential to me also to win the Tour de France. I think one year he got bad luck. He was in a great position, was second. Same year he won the Dauphiné, and then he had some had bad luck, health issue during one of the stages, and they could have definitely finished the tour on top. But all these guys are completely different, psychologically, physiologically. Some prepare more for one-day races, more for stage race. But I have to say I've been lucky. From Andy Amsterdam, the first one, through the Motorola group, George, Lance, and Kevin, and
Bobby.
Yeah, exactly.
Bobby is Cole's coach now.
Bobby's
Yeah, no, and
Bobby's my coach
Bobby
now.
is one of the nicest and most, I would say, organized cyclists I ever worked with.
Yeah.
I think that he's a great coach, like he's already showing, because he always was interested to understand why you had to do this. Hey, a little bit like you on that. You also want to know why we do this workout instead. I like when athletes ask you the why. And some athletes don't want to know that. They say, just tell me what to do. I don't want to think about it. Just tell me what to do. Other ones, Bobby was really ahead, has been a good coach for a long time. We actually worked together during some of the BMC years when he joined the team as a coach. So we go back probably to the early 90s.
Bobby shared a funny story with me and said that you guys would meet up for dinner once a week in Lake Como, and you would write his training plans on a napkin and give it to him.
Yeah, no, that's true. I was used to do that. Those guys that they were living close. Another one at the same time that was coaching, and probably you guys don't know, was Pavel Tonkov. There was a Russian living in Italy, and
Oh, I know Pavel Tonkov. I mean, he won the Giro, right?
yeah, no, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
and Pavel was the same. He was coming out with his wife. They were living in Bergamo, to Como once a week, normally Monday night, and we had a dinner, just the two of us with the wives. And then, I was taking napkins was an extreme situation. Normally, I was bring a little paper block and I was writing down the workout for the next week, which is easy because, if you meet on Monday, that is the rest day, and they race on a weekend, you only have to put down 3-4 workouts. And, but, he was bringing back the whole workout because I had on my notes the plan for the whole month or the whole block. But we were going down. I don't like to do long, extensive blocks because things keep changing. So if I give you 6 weeks training program, and then after 3 weeks you have a need that bothers you, we need to reset the whole thing. So I keep for myself the block of 6 weeks. I put down as an idea, and then I do the week by week based on what the athletes tell me. So I know that that week, say the 100% will be to have, say, 22 hours with so many hours of quality training, but you are a little under the weather. I made a week a 16 hours week, and then I carry a note in the next week to start to build, and we shift the micro cycle and the mesocycle accordingly. So I'm not a believer you have to talk to the rider every day because then you keep saying the same thing. And if you
Mm-hmm.
say the same things too many times, it's like don't say anything because you have to, find a good balance between talking regularly to adjust training and know what's going on with the athlete. And that is my opinion. Everybody has a different style of coaching people. Um, I like the athlete, they understand why they do this and that. So if something happens, they can adjust on the way. They have a mechanical or they have to make the right shoulder because it's raining. And they can see, okay, today I know that the valuable part was those 30 or 40 minutes I do in the early phase of training because the weather's going to change. So I like to talk to them regularly, but not too often because otherwise every time you say the same thing is losing value.
So you started with 7-Eleven in 1985. We're now 2026. What are some of the biggest things you've seen change in the approach to training? Obviously, not everybody, but there are a lot of different ideas out there when it comes to training, and there's certain types of riders that they should train differently, a sprinter versus a GC rider. But are there a couple of things that you've seen have evolved, or is it basically still the same?
No, I mean, so the science is, so the human body is still the same. The science has been changing in a few aspects. So for example, nutrition. I went through all the phases where when I joined cycling, they were eating big steaks in the morning. Then we went with starches and complex carbohydrates. Then we went back to add more protein, the recovery, the amino acid, branching amino acids. So it goes now is high sugar intakes and so and so. So that goes. I would say that in general, and this I say as an observation, is not a critical comment, that there are two elements there. One is the science that changes, and one is the marketing. So a lot of the science that get to the rider or the coaches or the weekend warriors is pushed by marketing. It's not necessarily pushed by science. So sometimes there's a little gaps, make things looking working different than the way they work. So that is the part that, there was not much of that when I started. There was no marketing pressure. When I started, there was no real drinks. We had to make the drinks at the Giro de Tour. We were making our own drinks, adding sugar and salt and lemon or orange juice to this big container of water to make 100 bottles for the next day. And we were changing a little bit the concentration based on the temperature. We knew that it would have been very hot, so they were going more for liquid. So some of the calories were taken from fluid because they were drinking more fluid. And so we're trying to reduce a little bit the concentration because they had to drink more. So was based on just common sense and basic science. We didn't have a sponsor for drink, a sponsor for bars. I remember the team doctor in Dozier was also the nutritionist, so I was going to the hotel and talk to the chef what we need for dinner and what we need for breakfast. And then I was walking, the Giro was easy, walking outside the hotel to find the closest bakery. Sometimes the hotel chef was giving me the name of their bakery. And I was ordering for the next day 80 or 100 rice cake, blueberry cake, so real food. And then we're wrapping everything, and people had real food. The bars came later with sport drinks, and then gel came even much later. And so that is completely different. The other thing I would say, the other important change is that at the beginning there were very few cycling coaches. Most of the teams, they were just training together. So it was the sport director that was a former cyclist telling, guys, this week you need to do so many kilometers, try to do 3-4 hours in a climb. There was no really intensity as part of that. In fact, when I started, the philosophy, especially in Italian cyclists, was, you go easy during the week and then you go hard on the race. So training was coming from the races. At the beginning, you were just doing volume to be in shape. And the idea was to start the tour 4 or 5 pounds heavier so that you had juice left for the last week. Now you know that you have to be at top from day one, But also that has been compensated for some, not for everybody, to have to select just some of the races they want to pick for. While at that time, everybody was doing everything. Like, riders like Eddie Merckx, I never worked directly with him, but he was doing the Vuelta, the Giro, and the Tour every year. So that would be impossible now, to think, because you want everybody to peak for their main goal. So now everybody has a coach. Every team has a performance team that supervise the nutrition, the training, the altitude. and all these kind of things. At the time, were very few teams that had that.
I mean, you bring up Eddie Merckx and how that era was so different, right, Max? And people like nowadays to talk about Pogacar and compare Merckx and Pogacar, who's the best. But it's pretty impossible to do that, don't you think?
Oh, I agree 100%. That's why I didn't
Yeah.
want to answer what are the top three
Yeah.
athletes I coach in terms of physiology, because
Well,
you
I
can't
mean, I
compare.
guess I was talking about, you just put them in a lab and you see numbers and whether that translates to results on the road or not. I'm just
Uh,
curious about, you've tested
Well, let me tell you
thousands
one
of
thing.
athletes.
This is not uh, the first athlete I tested that showed the highest VO max I never tested at that time, and the highest power for 5 minutes was Cancellara when he was 17 or 18, and he just won the world championship time trial for the second time in a row. He was living in Zurich, and he came down to the Mapei Center, which is still on the border between Italy and Switzerland. He came out down with his dad and probably his coach at the time, and we put this guy on the machine, and we keep checking if the number were right. There was some problem with the calibration. I said, man, this guy definitely has an engine. And so I remember that was the first time I saw a huge number, because we just opened the Mapei Center. He was one of the athletes that we tested in the early phase of the Mapei Training Center.
Do you
Do you
do you
remember
remember
what he did for 5
the
minutes?
number? Yeah.
So
And how
no, I
does that
remember
compare to
because he exceeded by a
Christian
lot the 6 liters of absolute VO2 max, which for a guy at the time he was around 70 kilos. He had the best result in his career around 78, 80 kilos, which is huge for a cyclist because he's 175 pounds or in their range. And now most of the riders, they are much lighter than that. And so a VO2 max for a guy that mass had to be over 6.5 liters of oxygen per minute to make him competitive also on the climb. In fact, he was never a climber, but in his best year, he could hold on the climb for a long time.
So was he doing
Yeah.
like over 600 watts for 5 minutes?
Oh yeah, no. In fact, I think I still have a file of him when he won the prologue of Tour of California with Mapei. One of the first Tour of California, there was a time trial in
Sacramento?
I was at the campus of Stanford, right?
Oh, right, correct.
That
Yeah.
was
Oh, wow.
around 5 minutes effort,
It was pretty short. It might have been less than 5 minutes. I
maybe three
remember
and a
that.
half
Yeah.
or something, but it
Yeah.
was way above 650 watts. Is
Yeah.
the power file in that race? He won it,
Yeah.
and yeah,
That's incredible. Now, back when you were coaching athletes, like I would say probably before 2000, were you guys using lactate meters in the field? Because
yeah,
nowadays that is the rage.
yeah. No, in fact, I personally in my office I use lactate from when the first lactate analyzer became available, and the first ones were not very accurate. The portable one, because they allow you to do a profile in the lab and a profile on the road. And yeah, still now when I test here at the Park City Hospital, 90% of the time I test that, I use the lactate numbers.
Yeah, I remember doing tests outside with you, using the lactate.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's practical. With BMC, we're going every winter. We had a camp in December and then one in January in Spain. And there is this nice climb. You know for sure the Col de Rat
Mhm.
outside Denia. And so I think we're the first team that started, and Bobby was there helping out. We're 4 or 5 of us, and we did the lactate test on that climb in December, and then in January to see the shift of the curve, how many was the gain in the different metabolic zones. And yeah, no, I still do that here in Park City. Park City is hard because of the altitude. So you need to put in some other adjustment factors. But yeah, I think testing athlete on the field has some advantages. The lab is nice because it's repeatable. So you compare the same condition. But my chair when I was really young was an exercise physiology, was my mentor. And it was an MD, PhD, who trained in Italy and Canada. And he was used to say, when you test an athlete in a lab, you're testing a different phenomenon because the lab is changing, the way is for a cyclist, you handle the bike, you
Mhm.
look at the environment outside, you got so many other things that interfere with the power output, so nice to have both.
For sure. Yeah, we still do a lot of the same testing in Denia on the
Yeah,
same climb. We do the exact
I'm
Mhm.
same type
sure.
of
Yeah,
test. Yeah.
yeah. In fact, the first year we were going there was nobody else. Then we start to see sometimes we're going there. Some other team we're using the same spot to take lactate. I say, hey, man, there were always this. So that now I think is a routine.
Man, now it's crazy. If you went to Denia now, you would lose your mind. It is just there's millions of cyclists. You can't even ride Rats anymore without stopping because people are just taking over the road. It's crazy.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I
So
was
Max,
planning to go for vacation.
you mentioned, you're obviously, you live in Park City. You've seen a lot of athletes, world class athletes, come to Park City to train. Peter Sagan, Johannes Klabo. Have you been able to test their lactate outside?
So I
Specifically,
tested
have you worked with
uh,
Klabo?
Peter many times.
Yeah.
I say several times because it's not a guy that likes to be tested. But in fact, I have to say, with Peter Sagan, we spend more time drinking coffee and having dinner than testing. But I have some test on him done up here. Clabo, no, I never tested him. I saw him training around here. Is a PT who travel with him all the time. Is lives here. So when they need something, she called me. But I saw him in person only once and never test him. I
What
would
do you
love to.
what do you
Yeah.
think made Sagan so special as a rider? I mean, there's not many guys that could compete with Sagan back in his era.
Yeah. So I met him as a junior, and he won a world a mountain bike junior title one year. And I was there because I was coaching another guy who won in the lead, and so he was by the podium. We were there. I met him for the first time as a junior, and the first thing I noticed that this is a strong guy. He could be strong in any sport. He's built strong, and he got even more strength than what his body size would tell you. In fact, there are a lot of stories about things he can do off the bike. Here in my living room, he showed us after a 6-hour day on the bike, he was able to bring a leg up 90 degrees and lean down on the other leg, touching the heel with his butt, keeping the other leg up 10 times after 6 hours on the bike. Like that, I don't see many cyclists being able, not even cyclists, athletes in general, after 6 hours on the bike. So this guy is extremely strong. Mentally, is very strong. Is very, I think, has been described different way. But what I saw when he was here, very serious about his training. I've been. I remember one day we're checking one thing on his biomechanics on a bike, and I told him maybe we should test you when you have symptom. He had a mild injury, but was bothering him after 4 or 5 hours on the bike. So when we test him in normal condition, the torque analysis was normal, didn't have any biomechanical issue. And so say, okay, let's do tomorrow. He was doing a 5 or 6 hours. After 5 hours, you stop by and we do the test when you have the symptoms. So the next day was no rain, was May. So it was like 34, 35 degrees with rain, steady, mixed rain, snow all day long. The next day would have been very nice. So I called him and I say, hey, looks like today is not the best day to do the 6 hours. It's gonna be cold and rain, snow, and maybe we should move tomorrow. They say, no, tomorrow I have something to do for the sponsor. But it's not that bad. It's only 35 degrees. I grew up training even when it's colder than that. No problem. So he showed up completely wet after 5 hours in the rain, snow, like nothing. We did the test, and So, he was very serious about doing his stuff and tried to get the best he could. And, he was talented. He got definitely good numbers. So we did use VO2 Max. Is another of those guys like Cancellara that are big, but they have such an absolute number of cardiopulmonary fitness that they can still be decent climbers, So he's an all-arounder.
Together.
No,
Ask your
I
question
was
again.
Max. I was asking if you saw the numbers of Christian Blumenthal, the world
No,
champion triathlete. His trainer coach put out a number of 101 VO2, and all of the other experts were um, very skeptical, to say the least.
the best way to know, you have to look at the work rate. So if you got 101 and he pushes 450 watts, there is something wrong. Either the machine was measuring too much oxygen for the real effort, so there was overreading the VO2 consumption, or is very inefficient. Because if you got, I don't know how heavy is the guy, let's say 70
He's a
kilos.
big guy. I don't know what his weight is. We'll look it up.
It's
Let's
probably
say
78, 80.
70, 80, let's say 80. So if you got 101, you multiply 101 for 80, it should have a VO2 max of 8.8 liters, right? With 8.8 liters, you should be able to push for a long time 700 watts. So if you say I score 101, but it was pushing 480 watts, either it's very inefficient, the machine was off. I've always been skeptical about the very high VO2 max if they don't come along with the work rate. Because what really makes a number amazing is the work rate. So how much watts they can generate. Watts is force over time, so is a work rate. So if you have a work rate of 600 watts, that means that you have to have so much of VO2 max or so little. You have to be within a small range of variability, depending how efficient you are in generating watts using oxygen.
Well,
They never
he's
put the watts. They only give you the VO2 max.
yeah.
So, no, I tested, let's say Peter Sagan, he scored, I think, 83 up here in altitude. That would be a 90 at sea level.
Whoa.
But he burned the machine. He was pushing 600 something, 620 the last step. And that makes sense, with that VO2 max. So if this guy is 101, that is an extra 10%. Was he pushing 700 at that point? I would
Yeah,
believe.
I don't know. I mean, he's clearly an amazing athlete. He's, if not
I
the
agree.
best, one of the best of all time. So I just thought it was, that was a question to pose to
So right
one
now
of the
we're not
best of all
recording. We're
time.
still recording.
No, we're
We're still
recording. We're
recording.
recording. We're
Yeah.
recording.
No, man, because I want to tell you something off
No, wait,
record.
we're not
But
recording. We're not recording. We're not recording.
I don't tell you the name of the rider. So in my early phase, I talk about 7-Eleven, so 85 to 90. I was working in sport medicine at the university at that time. And I took all the 7-Eleven team to our lab. And we had the bike that had a good engine, was a Siemens, but was not going over 450 or 460 watts. So I tested all the guys, and one guy scored the highest VO2 max, even higher than Andy Hampson. I think it was 80 something. So I tell him this was a domestic, supposed to. It was a good time trial, but mainly a domestic. So I go to him and say, man, you got the best VO2 max in the team. Maybe you should try to be more aggressive with your result. Ask Jim to give the freedom to do some race for yourself and try to get the goal, because you got higher VO2 max than anybody. My knowledge at that time was only based on books, not much experience, So I thought the VO2 max was bigger part in a talent than what really is in real life. So the guy goes to Jim, say, hey, Max told me they have the highest VO2 max. I can try to win races for myself. So the first thing he has was a $30,000 raise in his contract. So Jim comes to me, Jim. Max, you told this guy, no, it cost me $30,000. I said, no, but, trust him, he was not making a lot of money, but so 30,000 was a big difference. And so we tried to train him, and the guy won some national time trial. In the race, he got third in one stage of the Romandy, but he couldn't really make the big difference. So sometimes was getting dropped before people with lower VO2 max. A few years later, I went back and I looked. Yeah, he got the high VO2 max, but the work rate he produced was not that great. So what was holding him back was the economy. So he got a huge engine, but he was not using all the power to generate speed. Some was wasted in maybe increased temperature or some other loss of energy. So that's I learned that lesson. And Jim is still telling me, "Yeah, you costed me that year that much money. You got third in the stage and it cost me 30,000." So that is the way
That's
with
funny.
VO2 Max. So now when
Uh,
someone tell me, sometimes I have people that come, they want to be, say, "Hey, I want to become a pro." Normally they already past their 30s. So I say, why you want to be a pro at this 30? You should have a career in something. And they come, I got this VO2 Max. They bring all this application, which I don't even know how to read. Say, this is that, it is that. And they put them on the bike and they blow up at 280 watts. I say, yeah, but if you push 280 watts, doesn't mean if you have a 79 of VO2 max, you generate 280. You don't go anywhere with 280, So there are a lot of
yeah.
different. So if you talk to someone or the coach or talk to the athletes down the road, so say when they measure 101, was that a sea level? It probably was in Norway. Well, how many watts you pushed? Or if it was running on the treadmill, how fast you were running.
Uh-huh.
That's super
So,
funny.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
It's a
Thank
great
Hey,
you.
did
story.
you talk
Thanks,
to
Max.
Andy Hampton?
He hasn't emailed me back yet, but man, I hope he
Oh, he
does.
will.
Okay.
Is busy with his son career. Now his son is junior high.
In
Oscar.
doing what?
No, he's playing soccer in the local team, but
Oh,
they
okay.
go see soccer all over Italy. They go to see matches here and there. He's
Does he
into
So
still
Andy
live
soccer
lives
now.
in
in Italy?
Castagneto Cartucci?
Yeah, he's there in
Yeah.
Castagneto Carducci. He told
Yeah.
me he'll have a bike camp at the end of this month in Elba Island, and then he's gonna have three in the fall. And then next year he's gonna do a big one in around Bormio and the Stelvio Pass, those mountains there. He's
No,
still organizing bike camps.
I'd love to ride the Dolomites with Andy. That would be a dream come true.
Yeah, hey, go there when he has a camp. He'll be
Yeah.
happy to have you.
That'd be
Be
cool.
sure,
Okay.
be sure that your wife doesn't kick your butt in front of everybody.
Okay, I'll train. Jeez.
Hey, I don't know. I heard that she's really fast.
Yeah, well, she's okay on a bike, but she's a very
Oh,
fast swimmer and
oh,
she's getting pretty fast at trail running. She's done multiple 100K runs already, and
okay.
she's getting close to going sub 15 hours in 100K.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
15 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. She signed up for the Bryce Canyon 100 miler in September.
Oh, okay. Are you coming
Yeah.
out with her?
Yeah, we'll come through and you'll finally get to
Stop
meet her.
by. Maybe we test her. We see what their economy
Yeah,
running is.
that would be a pleasure.
But let me know. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Max.
All right,
Thanks,
guys.
Max. Appreciate it,
Ciao.
man. Take
Thanks.
care. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Good luck. Yeah.
I'm pretty curious where you learned how to do bike fitting because you're like touted as one of the most legendary biomechanical bike fitters around, and you
No,
didn't
I,
start.
I, I started by mistake. And so in Europe, to become a sport doctor, the fellowship is 4 years. So in the United States, you do 1 year of musculoskeletal, so injuries that are not surgical, mainly the focus. In Europe is more performance. So they want to create a physician that can talk to the coaches, occasionally can be the coach. They recommend that you coach in a few sports. And when I did, you had to become coach in 3 sports. And I did rowing, cycling, and running. And because you do training science for 4 years during your fellowship. And one of those was applied biomechanics. So you do gait analysis, you do bike analysis, throwing analysis, kicking analysis for soccer. And so you know the problem that to do that in some sport you need pretty sophisticated equipment. Bike fitting was a part of that, but just basic thing. What are the functional measurement? What their structure measurement on a bike and stuff like that. When I started, all they were measuring was the inseam height. There was the Greg LeMond formula, the Eddie Merckx formula. Everything else was based on the so-called neutral position. And then we start to analyze the pedal stroke, how the pedal stroke and the efficiency changes with the saddle height, setback, and became more sophisticated. But I was going through me. Then I had my first job with the 7-Eleven, and we had the rider had knee pain. And this was our best rider for Paris-Roubaix. This was 6 weeks before Paris-Roubaix. You were in Belgium. This guy had anterior knee pain, condition called chondromalacia patella. And so, I was stressed. Was my first big rider, so close to a race. I want to make sure I didn't do anything wrong. So we took an airplane. We flew back to Italy to my university, where we had the big center for knee surgery and knee injuries. The chair was the president of the European Society for Knee Surgery. All the soccer players were going there. So this guy goes there, does a full exam and everything. Say, yeah, Max is chondromalacia patella. You need to give him 6 weeks off the bike. You need to do retraining the extensor mechanism. Man, the guy, 6 weeks, if you lose 6 weeks of training, 6 weeks before Paris-Roubaix, and you're a classic guy, your season is pretty much done. So it was really, really upset going back. And we came back to the hotel, and one of our soigneurs was from Belgium. Say, hey, talk to this doctor. I think it was Dr. Jensen. He's the doctor from the Dutch team. He was there with one of the Dutch team in those years. I remember it was super calm for one of those. I go there and I ask this guy, say, I have a guy with the bad knee. I remember I didn't tell him the diagnosis. And, anything that based on your experience, the guy was in his 60s, got a nice bow tie, really official, looked like a dog. And he said, yeah, bring him up to my room after dinner. We look at his knee together. So we go up after dinner, knock the door. His guy's there with his nice bow tie, smoking a pipe, and he goes, first thing we walk in, he goes, where is the bike? And they say, what do you mean? I thought we were checking the knee. Yeah, this is a cyclist. I cannot check the knee without checking the position of the bike. I will miss 50% of the problem. And so I started thinking, maybe I should have been more focused during those classes of biomechanics. So we go down, we get the bike. At that time, there were no own trainer. So we go up with the bike, and the guy sits on the bike leaning against the wall and pedal backward and then stop, pedal backward and then stop. And he say, make sure, let me see when you're in the drop. Have him, doing some adjustment, make sure that it's kind of in his normal position. And then even before measuring, he look at me and say, oh, I think he had bad case of chondromalacia patella. And I say, how you know? You didn't even touch the knee. And he goes, I don't need to touch the knee. See, he's 8 millimeters too forward, probably 11 millimeters too low. So sooner or later, it's going to have chondromalacia patella. And so what should we do? Say, let's go down, get the wrench. At that time, bikes were easy to work. With the wrench, you can fix everything because there was no special stuff, So with one wrench, you can do bike fitting. That's all you needed. And so he does the adjustment by himself. The doctor moved the saddle up a little back, look at the cleats. And then he goes, so tomorrow, do 30 kilometers flat. Then you take a day off. Then you do 45 kilometers flat. And you take a day off. And the day off, you do the exercise that the doctor down at the university gave you to strengthen the extensor mechanism, stretch your ITB. So things that were normal for a recommendation for the injury. So long story short, everything went well. After 1 week, he was able to train, because the beauty of cycling that if you have a problem with the cartilage under your kneecap, if you move the position, you can have the point of maximum pressure, the shear force, going through a different area that is not injured. So you can still train with no pain while the area that was injured has time to get better. You cannot do that in many other sports. And the same for Achilles tendinitis. So the beauty, I think, if you are a physician, they want to see cycling injuries, you need to learn how to check the position and understand the correlation between an injury or a position. So at Mapei, we start to think ahead about this. Everyone that was coming for a VO2 max or a lactate, we were recording their torque analysis and we're filming to see the angle, the dynamic angle. And already after 1 year, because we had already several dozens of tests, we could see torque analysis, how you apply the force in the direction of the movement. They were changing. And then we learned that change predict an injury, And when I was at UC Davis with Judd, still was there. Judd Vansickle is a biomechanist. We had a lab where we're testing this. We had 600 torque analysis that we tried to correlate to injuries because some were done before the injury became symptomatic. So I think that in cycling, if athletes monitor, they can anticipate some of the injury, not all of them.
So how does this fit into today's revolution of shorter cranks?
Shorter crank, I have been a believer of shorter crank where everybody was going long crank as an advantage on knee traveling, range of motion, and hip range of motion. My idea has always been that the power on the bike comes from the force multiplied by the speed, right? So you can generate 300 watt by going 50 RPM and pushing 60 Newton meter of force on the pedal, or go 100 RPM and apply only 30 Newton meter of force on the pedal. So the force, you like to use force if you are an old guy and if you are big and muscular. So you see this big grinder, I'm 70, I go out with big people. I think I got more muscle than lungs in my category, and always been like that for me. You probably have more lungs than strength. For you is different because you had a background as an alpine skier. But so you see this, I think depending on the athlete, some athletes generate better power more efficiently in one way versus another. So you can find this data. And I think that the short crank arm enhances the performance, especially the development of fatigue over time, because by using more cardio than fatiguing the muscle, you save strength for later. You have to be cardiovascular fit, clearly. But Lance showed that already. When he was very fit, he always had the high cadence. He was probably the first one to use a very high cadence.
So you'd say for time trials, shorter cranks are big advantage.
For most of the people, if you have people that their problem is the strength to push, maybe you have to find something in between. But if you have, there is some other advantage. Short crank arm, normally on a time trial, I think helps also the aerodynamic. You don't move so much the knees, so all these flows that in a wind tunnel you measure. So there are some other beneficial factors. But the best is to test each athlete. Now, in the lab, we have adjustable crank arm. And so you can test, a different crank arm, what's the efficiency of this athlete at the same power output, same threshold or functional threshold power. You test at 3 different lengths and you see, the torque more efficient, you have less peaks and valleys, you're smoother. Eventually, you measure also the oxygen, you're more efficient at this combination. So there is a lot of things that can be played with. Yeah, you cannot do with everybody because it's very much time consuming. That is the beauty. When I was in Mapei, the sponsor wanted us only to work on the athletes. And so, we had maybe sometime we had only one of the athletes for the full day. We could do all the tests we want on this guy. But sorry for them, but it was good for us. Yeah. Now, if you work in a system, like in hospital, you don't have that kind of time. You have to split in smaller fraction. So, but teams can still have that privilege to dedicate time to each rider.
So Max, we're almost out of time here. I think a good question to end on is you have a vast experience at all levels of the sport, but specifically at the highest level. You've worked with many champions. You've been on just legendary teams. The first super team in cycling, Mapei. What do you predict for the future? What are some of the um, what are some of the areas that are still under researched, underutilized? Is there anything that we should be looking towards as far as you know uh, gains for people to have?
So, what I would like, and there is already a lot going down that road, that we find better way to predict overtraining in athlete or burnout in athlete, especially the psychological component. I've never been a trained psychologist, but dealing with athletes, sometimes I had to become a psychologist, like most of the coaches are. And now, definitely, I'm lucky. I got some great sport psychology I'm working with, but I think sometimes for them it's still hard to be listened by the management before by the athletes. I think mental health is going to be, I think, the next area where we need to put more resources. Because the sport is becoming more stressful. These athletes got selected even younger, so they got selected early, which is good. But then they got projected on a big stage sometime before giving them the time to have the tools to manage the stress and the pressure. So I think that is an area in which I think we need to put more. First, we need to educate the people in that work, including the doctors and the management and so. And as I said, some team already doing a good job. Is not yet, a round word out there on that. So I would say probably that's the area.
Do you think meditation could be a useful tool within a team for each rider?
And I think everything, there's the same thing goes case by case. I try to meditate myself. It never worked for me because I can't do it. I can stay still for that long. But
Yeah,
everybody has a different way to cope, I like
yeah.
music. Some other people likes, I
Mhm.
like to ride, and I ride by myself. It's like the same for you. You go out on a
Mhm.
bike, long rides, and that is meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cross country skiing, in
Oh
winter,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
if you go, everything around you is really slow, you got
Yeah.
options.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, Cole, do you have
But
any
now it's
parting
important that Cole
questions?
find out the tool, so it's gonna kill everybody out there.
Yeah.
Thanks. No, I'm slowly starting to figure it out. I'm slowly finding my
No,
way.
you'll do fine. You just have to be patient and listen to people like Bobby and these people, George. They have a lot of experience.
And
Because
Levi.
at the end, the experience is important, And if you
Yeah.
don't have time to build yourself, you need to get some from the people that surround you.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean, even hearing from you, 40 plus years in the game, and some of the same stuff that you were preaching 40 years ago, some of the guys don't even know about today. So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think, yeah,
maybe it's
no,
better. But yeah,
no,
no,
well,
thank you.
I really appreciate your time, Max. Thank you so much. This
Thank
was
you. It was
awesome.
fun to talk to you guys.
This was really
Yeah.
cool.
It's
All
it's
right.
just a it's just a pleasure to hear you spread your wisdom and your knowledge. Thank you, Max.
No,
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you guys.
Thank you, man. I
And good
really
luck.
appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye bye.